Hi, Andromeda 6. I'd just like to say a huge thank you for the video you just released. My name's Bill. I've been trying to make a video on selective service for a long time now, and I just can't get the tone right, but you nailed it. You did a much better job than I could, so what can I say? Bravo Zulu, well done. If you'd like to follow a link that I'm going to put in a hotspot, or down in the low bar, it'll lead you to a comment piece done by the New York Times, which I think you might find interesting. It's about women in combat or women in service with the United States military. It makes an awful lot of good points, and I agree with a lot of them. However, I really disagree with the tone of the piece, so if you're going to watch it, it might be worth listening to the rest of this little rant. First thing is, women are not routinely exposed to combat conditions. It's a myth. The extremely rare occasions where it does happen are the exception that proves the rule, rather than anything else. This is true for men in the armed services as well. It's a very small percentage of the fighting force that actually does the fighting. Just as you said in your video, I think it's 97.4% of American casualties in Afghanistan and Iraq are male, even although the males are only 84% of the DoD's strength. The 32,800 plus wounded, of those 32, almost 33,000, only 606 women have been wounded so far. So it's very rare to go into combat. From a British perspective, we've lost 2 very brave female soldiers in Afghanistan since the conflict started, but as of 2 or 3 days ago, the total for men is up to about 432. So I think the general point I'm making is it's unusual for a woman to be put into a combat situation. Most of the fighting is actually done by infantry and armoured units. Okay, before I say anything more about the military, it's worth thinking about who's reporting on the military as well. You know, the vast majority of journalists, they're not adrenaline junkies, they're not thrill seekers. If they were, they wouldn't have got a job where they write about and take pictures of things that other people are doing. You know, they don't like excitement. So if you're watching a film from a combat zone and you're wondering why nothing much is happening in it, the chances are it was filmed 3 blocks from the journalist's hotel. Military commanders don't like to expose their people to any more risk than they absolutely have to. So they don't tend to send the lads out if they think there's a chance of a contact going down. They don't like to send the lads out with a big noisy film crew in tow. You know, it's really not worth the risk to their people. So basically what that all adds up to is that the majority of the fighting is taking place well away from the cameras, and the guys doing the fighting, you're not going to see them until they're stepping back off their aeroplane at Bryce Norton, or somebody decides to do a piece about how hard the nurses at Camp Bastion are doing. Thinking about that, you're going to have to insert the US equivalents for arriving back home and safe rear area. I think the thing is, I'm very sceptical about the whole media approach to this. You know, that film that I've just linked to, there's a male officer in it, and he says about the women soldiers, they're nothing special, and that's very true. They're doing exactly what a male would do in the billet. Just for example, the British tend to use sailors and airmen as additional security numbers, car searchers and that sort of thing when they're out on ops. We call it tri-service. That's much more of a concern in military terms than the sex of the non-infantry, non-armour, but definitely army personnel that the Americans are using. They've met their fitness standards, they've completed basic training. Yeah, it would be nice if they had more training, but there's a limit to how much you can give, you know. They're soldiers and that's what they should be acting like, and if they're not prepared to act that way, well, they shouldn't be in uniform to start with, let's be honest. I think what I'm really objecting to is this tacit assumption that the girls wouldn't be expected to fight and they weren't properly prepared for it. Now that's bollocks. They're in the army. You go to a combat zone, you've completed training, I mean, it would have amazed our World War II counterparts just how much training we get before we go on operations. So if the American media stop pushing this little princess notion onto women, where women expect all the advantages but don't have to do any of the work, the girls on the ground might just stand a chance of meeting the challenges that they're going to have to face. I don't like that whiny tone in the report or the assumptions that it made, but I do agree with their core point, and that's that women can meet military roles. Not all military roles, but they can meet a lot of them. There's an awful lot of military roles where you don't have to be built like Arnie to perform. You know, you can be a mechanic, you can be a communications specialist, you can be a clerk, you can be all sorts of things where you don't necessarily have to carry a 40-pound pack, an individual weapon, and go tabbing over half the world. Women have seen combat in most recent Western conflicts. A lot of them have died in those conflicts, and I think we should acknowledge that, but we should also be prepared to use the main bulk of our female personnel as appropriate. Now, I'm not saying we've got it all right. The brass are getting it spectacularly wrong all over the place in all different nations. An example would be in artillery. Women gunners are absolutely appalling. It's not their fault, but they're not built to carry artillery shells. And what happens is you get a female member in the gun crew. The female ends up being carried by her male counterparts. Pretty soon there's a bit of resentment building. She starts claiming sexual harassment. They start thinking women shouldn't be in uniform. It's completely unfair to everybody in the crew putting her there in the first place. Better to train her for something else. For instance, as the communications number in an artillery unit. You've got to apply a bit of common sense. You know, if Buffy wants the job, fine. Otherwise, don't have female paratroopers. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Basically, you're absolutely right. It's high time the Americans looked at selective service. You can't claim that women in American society are being disadvantaged in some hypothetic, generalised, gender-specific way when every single male of fighting age is specifically penalised on the grounds of his gender. There's real financial consequences and potentially fatal ones. See, women can serve, women do serve, so if men have to, women should have to. Private Benjamin wasn't meant to be a documentary, you know. Okay. If anybody thinks I've got this completely wrong, please remember this is my little rant. This is not Andromeda 6's heartfelt opinions, which were bang on the mark. Feel free to blast away at me in the comments or stick up a reply video, whatever you want to do. Again, thanks very much, Andromeda. It's much appreciated.